All right, I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to Common Solution. I want to start by letting everybody know this group is open to anyone who wants an awakening, anyone who wants a spiritual life. So we welcome anyone, everyone, alcoholic, addict, whatever you're addicted to, even if you're not addicted to anything, and you have maybe a friend or a family member that does the steps, or you want to do the steps yourself. This is a group to come to. Maybe you just want a deeper understanding. I remember one guy who went to this group years ago when I did it. The second time we did it, he realized he wanted his wife to come and to understand the steps more. So I'm going to talk about I'm going to read a quote of Bill Wilson in 1942. So our chief responsibility to the newcomers is the adequate presentation of this program. And that's exactly what this workshop's about. Our main focal point is an adequate presentation of this program. It's not a meeting or a book study, it's a workshop. So what is a workshop? You know, I mean, you can go back centuries and the word workshop is referred to a place where way back in the day, where stuff was manufactured, repaired, shoes, furniture, whatever, watches even. And in modern times, workshop's a place you mentioned at work, we're having a workshop today to learn something possibly new, but also to learn something hands-on experience. And workshops are for learning and building and constructing. And let's say I'm going to go to carpentry school. I want to become a carpenter. So I go to carpentry school and I take the classes on it, but then I go to carpentry workshop where I can actually start building something. Some of us had wood shop in high school, or they called wood workshop. We built birdhouses and chairs and stuff, and metal shop, we learned to weld something. And I didn't have one in my school, but I wish they did, was a car workshop where you learn how to take a car apart and build it. Hands-on experience means hands-on learning. And at a workshop is where you will learn about a product, how it works and what it does. And this workshop's no different. It involves hands-on learning on how this solution works and what it does. So in short, it's a 12-step action group where we have the opportunity to experience the steps together. We don't do it at a group level necessarily, but we will do the first 3 steps together and learn deeply the rest of the steps. And maybe it's a different perspective than what you've seen before, but there's each group member will can receive clear-cut directions by individuals who've done them, and we take this journey on the same footing. That's just the way I look at it. I want to point out this workshop is not meant to replace one-on-one step work with your sponsor. Group members need to meet with their sponsor after they come to the group. If that's what you do, if you just want to come in here and just learn and kick back and listen, that's fantastic too. Whatever you decide works best for you. So tonight's more of an orientation to this group, and I'm going to talk a little about history and stuff like that. But back to like what this group's about is our aim is very simple. For anything, it's for those who feel hopeless or powerlessness, a chance to receive God's healing power, whatever God as you understand him, whatever you call it. If anything, a big aim for us is to take the fear out of working the steps. And for those who've done the steps before, our group offers an opportunity to possibly experience stuff again, gain a deeper understanding and knowledge. And we get a lot of people that want to do that. Your fourth and fifth step might be shorter, but it's like if you decide you want to follow along with the pace of the group and do that. But there might be other reasons. Maybe it's like you want that deeper understanding. Maybe you want to learn how to sponsor, because we give a lot of sponsorship advice in here. Maybe you want to master, you feel like you need to master this subject more as a presentation wise, whatever it is. I mean, this group, maybe just want 100% solution-based group, but that's what we do here. So this is a workshop. I mean, this speaks for itself. That's what makes it special. I do know where there is strong recovery, there is strong 12-step work, and where there's weak recovery, there's weak 12-step work. From my experience of doing this group, once you've taken this group, you will know the difference. That's one of my things. My main goal is just that if I can help one person, that's all that matters. But you're not going to look at the steps the same, in a sense, even if you don't like what I have to say. But each group participant does need a sponsor. And there's anyone who needs a sponsor, put your name in the chat, because we have sponsorship coordinators in here. They can help you with that. And there's people looking for sponsees. So we'd be glad, to meet with you after the group, and and so forth. So I'm going to give you a little history of this group. So a little bit about me is I got sober on August 23rd, 2000, out of many, many, many years of trial and error in Alcoholics Anonymous. I never got past the third step. I never got more than 3 months of sobriety. But when I was in AA, I was restless, irritable, discontent, sitting on my hands, hoping life would get better. And this is the best it gets in recovery. And then there's those do-gooders, I called them, who talked about the way out and awakening and stuff. That's why I looked at them as just anyone that was doing well in life was just a do-gooder. They already had it. They're just, showing off. And I got to the point where I lost everything. I went to rehab almost 8 times. Well, maybe almost 20 times, because I went 6, 7 times, but a lot of times I didn't show up. I was brought to a sponsorship line of people that do the steps straightforward, very straightforward. And I met these guys in the 90s. I wasn't ready for them yet. And I followed them and I did everything they did, and they would wear you out. One day to go into Salvation Army, one day to go in here, this book studies here. And I did the steps with them and had a spiritual experience, actual spiritual experience, and it was powerful. Started doing book studies in 2002 at a halfway house. My first one in 2001 was sponsees, but the halfway house one was the first real book study I did. And then 2004, I joined my sponsor in a book study at a 70-person rehab. Did that for almost 15 years. But in 2012, I was doing a book study, and it was the same people in there each week. Some were sponsees, but I kind of got the wind that they wanted to be somewhere else with the steps, and they weren't there. Some of them were just lazy, I'll be honest. So I thought, I'm going to start a workshop where we just give these people opportunity to do the steps again, if that's the way they want to do it. So on August 7th, 2012, with 16 people, within about a few weeks, there was 23 there. Then it started to grow and grow and grow. All of a sudden we had 40 people there. But after a while, it started to get stronger and stronger. And we did 16, I wound up doing 16 rounds of this. It's a 4-month, roughly a 4-month workshop. Did 16 rounds of it. Over 200 people attended, not all at once, but attended. Some of them were like, one guy, for instance, came to our group and right away brought his sponsees to the group, which I recommend. If you're here and you got sponsees, bring them next week, because it will start step 1. But some guys went to the groups brand new and then got sponsees, and they got sponsees, and it just kept going. And that's just the beauty of this. And of those 200 people, 56 did the steps the first time, 60 did the steps again, and that was the powerful. And that's a rough estimate. So tonight begins another round of this, and it's the second time I've done it on Zoom. I did it a year and a half ago. So the reason it grew in so fast, the group, is because people want more of this. That's the powerfulest. What I love about this workshop is it brings people together and forms bonds. These book studies I've done in here, we just did 45 lesson book study, 45 lessons total. That's almost a year. This one won't last that long, but I'm going to put up in here, you'll see me screen sharing a lot, and this stuff, all you gotta do is let me know, and it's hard to get it out of the chat, but a lot of the stuff I can get to you, when we do our 4 steps and all that stuff. So let me screen share really quick. So what we got tonight is just give you a quick thing. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but week 1 is of course tonight, and it's introduction. Step 1 would be next week, and then we got 2. There's no group on Thanksgiving because no one would probably show up. I know I wouldn't be here, so I get in trouble if I did. Week 4 is step 3. Now we'll do the third step prayer as a group. If there's 50 people in the group, we will do it one by one, and it's powerful. And the main thing is, like with the first step next week, is at the end of the group, we'll break out in the breakout rooms, and people will actually take the step with a small group and with questions and stuff. And that's if you want to do that. And it's up to you, but it's very powerful. And I want I'm a big proponent of the first step experience, and that's teaching the allergy exception, allergy obsession straight out of the big book. But I want the person to have the full first step experience, and it's kind of a lost art form today. The same thing with 2, and the same thing with 3. Then we get into a deeper workshop aspect. We do many weeks of inventory, and I do the instincts, the pride, the self-esteem, and I explain that in one group, what that third column is about. I do resentment 1 week. Now the harm inventory, not everyone's done a harm inventory. Some have. It usually is 50-50, or some's never done one before. We do a harm inventory. We do a fear inventory, sex conduct. I do a thing on 5, 6, and 7. And here's the magic of this group. If a person just did 5, 6, and 7, when we do a testimony night, and they're the first ones to speak, everyone after that can tell their past experiences. It's phenomenal. It's really cool. The 12th week is 8 and 9, and we'll probably do some testimonials there too. We got to that is 10, 11 is step 10. We have a 10-step packet to pass out. If and if you do it differently, that's fine. Step 11, we'll probably do a meditation. And step 12, we'll talk about sponsorship and maybe even have a guest speaker on that. And then we do a closing night, which kind of comes full circle. And if it goes well, we might do it over again. So the only thing that I ask is, materials. I will be giving handouts. Like I said, I just can't hand it to you. When I did this group live, like I was talking about before, and in person, everyone got a 3-ring binder and everyone got handouts each week. I'll do my best to figure out a way to get those to everyone in the group who wants one. It's very good to have. But, bring a pen, bring a highlighter, a notebook. But 2 important things to bring: a big book, right? We need a big book, right? And an open mind. That's probably the most important thing other than the big book. My job in this is, besides talking your ear off, is to try to bring the steps to simplicity, like a lower common denominator, something I call it like spiritual kindergarten. I want to be as simple as possible without changing this life-changing process. I probably try my best to hit every clear-cut direction that we can possibly have, and so we can fully experience this liberating process. And the thing is if you ever question anything, you have something to say, please don't do it during the group. Either ask to speak to me after the group, and if you want something to explain to you more, let's do it. One-on-one. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about the history of recovery, because it ties into what we'll be doing. And so the thing is, I'm going to read, and this is not a Christian group or a Bible group, but I'm going to read one of the oldest writings on alcoholism from the Proverbs 23, 29, 35. It says, who has woe, who has sorrow, who has contentions, who is fighting, who has wounds without cause, who has redness of the eyes? None of us, right? Those who linger over wine. Do not look at wine when it's in its red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it is smooth going down. In the end, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your heart will utter persevere things, you will be like the one who lays down on the mast of the sea, or the one who lies on top of the mast, saying, they hit me, but I did not get hurt. They beat me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake so I can have another drink? Of course, that's a little modern version of that. But if you go back to the history of alcoholism, I mean, the Chinese were fermenting grain beverages dating back to 1700 BC. Egyptian hieroglyphics have depicted problems with alcohol. They would actually cut off the hands of alcoholics in the hope that would work. It's, we'd probably find a way to drink. Romans poured molten lead down alcoholics' throats. In Spain, they would torture alcoholics. If they didn't quit, they would kill them. That people didn't understand it. And Greece, the Greeks had full warnings of the dangers of excessive drinking. But like I said, like China, Japan, India, all had readings about the dangers of alcohol. Europeans used humiliation to stop people from drinking. Think about this. I mean, the main cargo of Columbus's boat was what? Alcohol. And they had it because they liked to drink, but they also, more importantly, is it didn't spoil, right? And they could use it for negotiations. So go to our early colonies, the laws were built around drinking. A lot of them were. And then problem drunks were jailed, and they would put them in stocks. Your hands go in the stocks, right? And they would spit in the people's face when they walked to church. Really nice. And they were forced into free labor. Some were killed. But all the laws were written for alcoholics by non-alcoholics, right? But all that changed to a degree in 1785. And a guy named Benjamin Rush, who's a kind of like the first Surgeon General, without that title, called alcoholism a physical disease and said the only solution was abstinence. That's one of the problems, all they ever said. But most doctors and politicians did not accept Rush's theory. They viewed alcoholics as weak, mindful, and sinful. And his words were heard, though. In some areas, they started off they started some like medical treatment for alcoholism. And it grew, those little treatment things would grow into 1810, 1813, into the temperance movement. And the temperance movement started, and it's a simple idea. Teach people how to drink moderately. Well, not unless you have an allergy obsession, right? But in 1826, that changed to the American Temperance Society. And the problem was these, temperance movements were put together to make money for politicians to gain followers. Churches would teach temperance just so they could get the person, cleaned up and to join their church. But the temperance movement never went away. Matter of fact, it made a big comeback during Prohibition, but AA was formed and smashed it. But the important thing about the temperance movement, solution was moderation. Recovery plan was zero, none. And so the next one is the Total Abstinence Society, and that started around 1835. And this was built around not drinking. This group, was a huge publicity and press for people for running. There's a lot of politicians going for big office who want to be reelected. It died in like 3 years. Again, solution abstinence, recovery plan, none. So let me get some more interesting ones here. This is a real interesting one. In 1840, a group started by alcoholics for alcoholics. This is 1840. And it started when 6 friends were in a bar and started listening to an abstinence society group speaking. That they listened to the lecture. And they thought, well, we could do better than this. So they formed their own society of non-drinkers called the Washingtonians. And listen to this. See if you can see something in here. Their activities were commitment to the cause, continued participation and sharing, public confession, visits and speeches and visits and testimonies from older members. Now they had economic assistance, acts of service, for alcoholics, and sober entertainment. They were basically a fellowship. After 1 year, they had 5,000 members. 4 years, they had 700,000 members. One group had a big thing and they drew like 20,000 people. 3 years later, there was no trace of the group. 7 years later, after they started, they were gone, where they had 700,000 members at one point, because all they did was fellowship. They could not agree on spiritual ideas. They didn't see it as alcoholism disease as a big problem in these days. There was a big fight over that. And, like politicians would, when people want to get reelected and all that stuff like that, even the people that would know it's a disease would say it wasn't. And there was a big push to start putting alcoholics in mental institutions just to get them off the streets. So, this group did not understand alcoholism, as Washingtonians, and they disagreed on spiritual matters and philosophy. So the solution was fellowship, was abstinence and fellowship. Recovery plan, none. No program of action. But we're getting somewhere, right? 1890, the Emmanuel movement was formed out of Boston. They had 30,000 members at their peak, and they were basically the first, treatment center. And then they did what's called house calls. A doctor would come to your house and diagnose you and, put you under the care of, detox and nurses, and they would send a psychologist to do work with you. And they required that you have a personal desire to stop drinking. Sounds, sounds familiar. Acceptance, total abstinence, commit to group therapy, commit to counseling, and commit to mentoring by a lay person. And then once you get through that, you become a lay therapist. So almost like a sponsor. The one thing that's interesting about this is one thing to do with moral inventory. And if you go back to history of in the big book with Roland Hazard working with Carl Jung, Roland Hazard sent Carl Jung back to the United States after Hazard had failed with Jung. And Hazard had failed working with Jung, and Hazard told Jung told him to join a action group. Well, he didn't join the Oxford group right away, like a lot of people say. He joined. He found Courtney Baylor, which was a top therapist for this group, and he did moral inventory. So it's interesting. We don't know if it's the same moral inventory we did. If anyone knows that, I would love to hear it from you. But just a little history there. But they focused on religion and spirituality. They were greatly influenced by William James, book writers' experiences, but they didn't see. They strongly pushed conversion, but didn't know how to get you there. And the problem was they did not fully understand the nature of alcoholism. Again, no disease concept. And they got greedy. Solution was spiritual, but with no plan. Recovery plan, none. Right? So while these groups played a big part in the history of alcoholism because they work with alcoholics, there was one group that played bigger in a history that wasn't for alcoholics necessarily, and that was the Oxford group. And many of you have heard of the Oxford group. And the Oxford group was founded by Frank Bookman. And Bookman was, he was a Lutheran minister. And he had basically he ran a hospice that was kind of like a YMCA type of thing. So it was a place he ran. And it would have a little bit of everything there. People could stay there, people could sleep there, people could die there, whatever they had to do. And it was almost like a hospital. But he formed a board of directors, and he got fired from his own board of directors. And he had huge resentments towards those board. He got fired from his own company. So here's what happened. Bookman goes to the Keswick Convention in England. The Keswick Convention is still to this day, and it's a collection of all different, Christian speakers. And at this day, they had a lot of, metaphysics guys, and people were into them. And one of them was F.B. Mayer. And you want to hear F.B. Mayer speak, and he gets there, and there's a woman speaking, and there's no one there. But he listens to the woman speak, and the woman talks about making restitution to those you're angry at. Interesting. So he winds up writing a letter to each person asking for, how he can make it right. And he, just by doing it, he had a spiritual awakening. He saw that they were wrong, but he saw at the end he was wrong. And he immediately started taking others through confession and restitution. But he would build upon that more. But he called that situation the foundation of the Oxford Group. So he created, Bookman created what's called the four absolutes: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, absolute love. The early A members were deep into this stuff. And what's interesting is he was taking guys through that and having good luck with it and converting people. And in 1918, Buckman goes to China, and he's sitting at the Great Wall of China, and he meets this guy named Samuel Shoemaker. And Samuel Shoemaker is like, "Why are you here? Who are you here to see?" "I guess we're here to see each other." And he took him to the absolutes, and Shoemaker became an Episcopal priest. Oxford Group is formed. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm giving you the short end of it. I'm going to read from what is the Oxford Group. The central idea of the Oxford Group was the problems of the world could be healed through a movement of personal, dynamic, spiritual change. This change came through a set of core ideas and practices for daily living, believing the root of the problems were dishonesty, selfishness, resentment, and fear. Members were taught how to seek guidance from within rather than creed or biblical doctrine, believing experience with God rather than the biblical doctrine. They believed a bridge of powerlessness needed to be crossed in order to receive powers. You kind of see the thing in there. They had 5 C's. They had confidence, confession, conviction, conversion, and continuance. But there's hundreds of principles the Oxford Group did, but there's a set of them that really jumped out. I'm going to share the screen again. And these were the 5 procedures. Now there's slightly different versions of these, and these are the ones that I've studied over the years. And the first one is surrender your past and present and future into God's keeping and direction. Now the Oxford Group, if you wanted to be a member, you had to believe in God. Unlike a desire to stop drinking, you see the difference there, a little bit in AA and that. But surrender, past, present, keeping into God's direction. The second one was sharing our sins and temptations with another given to God. Sounds like step 5. Was there an inventory? Was there stuff they wrote down? Shoemaker suggested that to write down, their enemy list, their anger list, their hurt list, and just a list before they, so they could be organized. I don't know if that's just grew into what it was. The third one is restitution, which we call amends. Restitution, amends means to set right or wrong. Restitution means more than that, set right or wrong, and perhaps reconciliation, which means that you're going to be good with the person again and become friends with them. And Bill thought that was just too much to ask for. So he went with the word amends. Restitution to all those we have wronged directly and indirectly. We harm people directly and indirectly. 4, listening to God's guidance and carrying it out. Quiet time, right? Look at this last one. That sounds like step 11, right? To keep the conversion experience real by carrying this message of the Oxford Group of salvation to others. It was required to do this if you wanted full membership, right? It was also called the pulpit, to carry the message and get up front and all that. So here's the thing that's interesting. Bill Wilson failed with his first 6 prospects. We read that in the big book. And what happens is, Silkworth asks him, so what are you going with? What's your angle? What are you telling these people? Well, he's basically telling them his first procedure: surrender your past, present, and God's keeping and direction. And Silkworth's like, no, you're telling an alcoholic to do that? He goes, give them the medical facts first. The allergy obsession. And so he threw what would become step 1 on top of these ones, a little more organized, a little changed, twisted here and there. But the first person he brought that message to was Robert Holbrook Smith, Dr. Bob. If you go to page 180 of your big book, I'm going to read what Dr. Bob had to say about Bill bringing that step one message that he just was told to bring to someone, to put on top. Here's what he said, page 180. The question which might naturally come into mind would be, what did this man say or do that was different from what others had done or said? It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew, or I love this, or thought they knew about the subject of alcoholism. Remember, he's a doctor. But this was a man who had experienced many years of frightful drinking, who had all of the drunkard experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means which I've been trying to employ. And I would say the spiritual approach. He gave me information about the subject of alcoholism, which was undoubtedly helpful. Here's the important part. Of far more importance was the fact he was the first living human with whom I'd ever talked to who knew what he was talking about in regard of alcoholism from actual experience. That's why we all connected here. In other words, he talked my language. He knew all the answers, and he certainly did not because he picked them up in his readings. Practical, hands-on experience. So Dr. Bob and Bill would hang out with Bob for 6 months or so, and they had what they had called 6-step program. This is a variation. Every place had one different. There's only 2 places, but New York had like 3 different styles of ones, same words as different. I believe this is the one of the New York ones. One admitted we were licked, that we were power sober alcohol. So lick means defeated. That we 2 made a moral inventory of our defects or sins. We confessed and shared our shortcomings with another person in confidence. 4, we made amends to all those we had harmed. 5, we tried to help other alcoholics with no thought of reward or money or prestige. And 6, we prayed to God for power to practice these precepts. Pretty freaking cool. Pretty freaking cool. So let's going to fast forward a little bit of this history stuff, but in 1937, they had basically, from urban legend, is a Christmas party, and Bill's there with Bob, and he went back there to visit, and they started in 35, and they're sitting there, and they're like, look at all these guys. Do you work with him? He's working with him. They were thinking the same thing. They're onto something. So after that, Bill came up with, he's not going to go back to being a stockbroker anymore. Gave up his business. Instead, he wanted to focus full time on the future Alcoholics Anonymous. They had no name for it yet. Bill had proposed a speaking tour to go around the country, testimonies and stuff, just travel the states, but they had no money, way too expensive. So they came up with a new project, and the title of the project was called Book of Experience, and a book that would describe how to get sober and how to stay sober. That was their focal point. And Bill and these guys thought big. They looked at it as there's no way that this is going to be the most groundbreaking book ever, and they can change the world. In their minds, they didn't even think failure. And Bill knew that the book needed appeal for everyone. So he divided it into 3 separate committees when he wrote this book. The first committee was what he called the conservatives, which consisted of a faction of evangelistical Christians. The guy that Fritz Mayo was the one that led that group. In other words, the aggressive religious members that wanted Christian doctrine and wanted biblical stuff in the big book. The second group he called the liberals, and they were more spiritual, less religious, maybe just spiritual, but less combative and argumentative. And they were the voice of reason. And the last group was the ones that the other groups wanted out. And they were the ones that molded this big book, and they're called the radicals. They consisted of atheists, agnostics. So you had the agnostic ones that were agnostic at one point, that they looked up in the stars but wondered what created this, and they would doubt it and mixed up their whole life around it, skeptics. And then there's the atheists. And all 3 of these groups made the big book unique, especially atheist agnostic, because they came up with God as you understood him, power greater than yourself, spiritual nature, power. They just, took God out and put those in there. But they believe a psychological book was the way to go. And Bill later said, those expressions is what proved to be lifesavers. So you got a little bit from every direction there. When Bill wrote How It Works, something very unique happened. And what unique happened when How It Worked was written was he's getting to the part of the book. If he messes up, his book is done, because he's going to write how this program works, how it works, directions, the map, the recipe. And he's at his house on Clinton Street, and he has a migraine, and he prays to God for guidance. And he was questioned before that if he was the right man for the job. Matter of fact, he asked Shoemaker to write the steps, and Shoemaker said, no, this is your baby. So he started writing, and he wrote for 15 minutes nonstop, like it flowed out of his pen. And when he was done, he counted 12 steps. He wrote from the beginning of How It Works to the 12 steps in 15 minutes. I think divinely inspired. The title, that when he brought it back to those guys, they looked at the steps and like, why on her knees and why all these stuff, why a fourth step? And Bill nailed every single one down why they needed this stuff. The title evolved from Book of Experience to 100 Men, to A Way Out, to the Wilson movement. And the final choice was Alcoholics Anonymous, which was coined by a newspaper writer, in which the fellowship would also take as their name after that. So the fellowship didn't go fellowship in the big book, and went big book, Alcoholics Anonymous fellowship named after it. So in April 39, 4,700 copies of the first edition were published, priced at $3.50. Very expensive this time. That's equivalent to $60 today. And they sent direct mail announcements to this book to 20,000 physicians and got 2 orders. And 41 is like Saturday Evening Post carried a positive article about Alcoholics Anonymous. New York Times, nailed about how this is one of the best psychological books ever, and spiritual books, and unlike anything ever published. And it took them 2 years, but they got rid of all 4,700 books. First printing. And the big book is now one of the best-selling books of all time, selling 50 million copies worldwide. And from 1939 to 1955, 300 copies of the first edition were distributed, and 55 to 76, 1.1 million. And then the second edition, and the third edition, from 76 to 2002, 19 million. And the third edition started in 2002. They say 30 million for the last 10 years. Alcoholics Anonymous is kind of holding out on numbers nowadays. We'll get that in a minute. But there's got to be 40 million. But the sad thing is think about, I'm going to get into some depressing stuff in a little bit about what state we're in Alcoholics Anonymous. But there's 40 million big books, yet there's 19 million printed from 76 to 2002. And this has been going on almost, we're in the 20th year of this one. And we're probably close to 50 million books, right? But they claim only 3 million members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Where's the 47 million big books? And it's because Alcoholics Anonymous has become a revolving door. People go in and out, in and out, in and out. But back to the big book, and Time Magazine placed this book high on one of the most influential books ever written, and the Library of Congress designated as one of the 88 books that shaped America. First edition printings have sold for well into the hundreds of thousands, way up there, way up there. Why is it nicknamed the Big Book? Because if you look at books that are written, I have a dictionary somewhere I could show you, but I don't know where it is, but any book that's written between, up until from 1700s to 1920 had that big paper that kind of goes through it and a big thick binding. Well, then they got into smaller paper and thicker and better binding, and books didn't fall apart. Well, couldn't afford that, and they went to thicker binding, and they liked it because it looked big. So when they put it on a table, they said, "There's the big book." And it's pretty much what, because it was huge. But people thought they're getting the money's worth. So I'm I'm going to talk about growth of Alcoholics Anonymous really quick. Oops. Give me 1 second. I just messed this up. Let's do a share real quick. So members, 1935 obviously had 2 members, but 1940, it was 1,400 members, 50 groups, 45, 12, 12,000. 1950, 96. You get the gist. Look at how it started to grow, and then the recovery boom, hit, and of the 80s, and the recovery boom of the 80s. Look at the difference. Boom! It is a boom. 300,000 members to 900,000 to 1.9 to 1.2. They claim 1.2, and now they claim 2.5. But I think I could have my conspiracy reasons why they don't give out those numbers anymore. But the one thing is I want to talk about is recovery rates. And a lot of people might hate my guts for giving out recovery rates, but I want to do this first. I can do it like this. Oops, sorry. This thing does not want to work with me. Oh, wow. So anyways, I'm going to talk about Silkworth for a second. Dr. Silkworth from early 1910 or so to like for 20 years up until he met Bill, he worked with 30,000 alcoholics, 40,000 alcoholics, and he gave them the belladonna treatment. He told them what's wrong with them, offered mild elixir, all the stuff you hear about in the big book, and he had a 2% recovery rate, 98% failure rate, right? 98% failure rate. Big book comes out from 35 to 55. They claim a 75% recovery rate in the big book. They claim 50% and 25% more came. Cleveland claimed, but Clarence Steiner claimed a 93% recovery rate. Minnesota claimed an 83% recovery rate. In the 60s, they had a higher percent recovery rates. And the 50s and 60s, AA was not just a program of action, but a fellowship of action, right? And they boasted about these recovery rates because it was helping them grow. And as you know, in those days, there was 2 Alcoholics Anonymouses. There was the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were the exact same. The book was going into the fellowship, and as far as the program. In the 70s, the quality of recovery started taking a spiral downhill. And the recovery boom of the 80s, from 80 to 87, AA did a census report of members to find out what recovery rates were. And this is what they got. It came back 5%. It had gone downhill. People weren't doing the program. Now, this is what they came up with. They did another one in the 90s, and it came back. They thought, look, oh, it's got to be higher than that. And it came back with 3% recovery rate. AA stopped doing it then. In 2002, a report, another group did an outside one. They got 10%. But it's a scary thing, So that tells me what's happened to Alcoholics Anonymous, and is, addiction specialists tried to come up with their recovery rates, and they some that said 20, some that said 8. Now I know membership has grown to millions, but go from a 90% recovery rate, Cleveland claimed, or 75, the big book claims, even if it was 60%, down to 5, almost down to Silkworth's failures. So the question is, what happened? Let's go back to the beginning. Speaker meetings were 1 hour long, no discussion meetings. In 1956, the American Medical Association declared alcoholism to be an illness and called for hospital. And Dr. Bob used to sneak people in the hospital to treat them for alcoholism, to sponsor them. But in 1956, it all changed, and they called on hospitals to submit alcoholic patients the same priority you would do any patients with other conditions. So Hazelden had already been in Minnesota, had already been in the halfway house thing for years, turned their halfway houses into the first rehabs. And when the Minnesota model was born, the modern 28-day spin dry, AA started losing members, and they couldn't figure out, why are we losing members? And there's no newcomers coming in. Where's all the newcomers? So what happened was they did their research, and they found there's something called aftercare. And the people would leave rehab and they would meet in aftercare groups, and they would sit in a circle and they would talk about their problems. So in 1964, we got back to New York, and the AA Grapevine put out an article suggesting a new group called speaker discussion groups. Suggested. Well, almost all the groups did it. The new meeting format was never tested or tried in AA. I'm not a hater on AA meetings by any means. I don't hate speaker discussion meetings, but if it ever worked, they didn't even know if it worked or not, and they started it. It was the brainchild of AA World Service. The way AA meetings were before the speaker discussion meetings, you had a 1 hour speaker or 2 half-hour speakers, and you weren't allowed to speak until you did your fist up. And AA put the mic in the hands of newcomers, which is not a bad thing, but what do they got to say, right? When they first start. In the 70s, you had court-appointed people coming in. By the 80s, meetings were never the same. And by the 40s, 50s, and 60s, meetings it's kind of like what we see today in some places. It's not all places, but some. And there's no longer 2 Alcoholics Anonymous anymore. There's a fellowship and there's a big book. They're 2 different things. They're not the same thing anymore. The majority of people in Alcoholics Anonymous don't do the program compared to people in this group. I'm sure if you come here, that's because you know the program. Now, those recovery rates true. I mean, who knows? But I do know this: if you do the steps, you have a chance of 75%. I say 100%. If the people ask me all the time, they go, "What's your percentage of a guy that does the steps?" I never see anyone relapse that did the steps, and I'm going to tell you why. I do book studies, and I say that, and some guy raises his hand and go, "I did the steps and relapsed." I go, "Did you make all your amends?" No. Or they say, "I never sponsored." There's always a never in there. I think if you do the steps, it's 100%. Prove me wrong. And my friend Derek does a great analogy of the meetings, and this is not to bash the meetings, it's just a fact. Hypothetically, let's say it's called Broken Kneecaps Anonymous, and I break my knees and I go to Broken Kneecaps Anonymous, and after 6 months my knees are still broken because all they talk about is broken kneecaps. It's an interesting way to put it. So I'm going to move on from this part. We kind of get the gist. But in 1958, Grapevine, this is an interesting thing. Bill Wilson said, "Freedom from alcohol, the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of the AA group. Groups have repeatedly tried other activities and they always failed." There's always confusion what recovery is. Many believe recovery is abstinence. Many believe recovery is picnics and camphouse retreats, alumni nights and alumni of the year, whatever. But running to the next group, some believe it's commitments and birthday person and all that stuff like that. That's elements of it. It's not the program. It's also a successful person. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a person that heard 5 fifth steps or heard 1. It's a person who has the most time away from drink. The stuff we're trying to get, the stuff we're trying to end. It's not a spiritual awakening or anything like that they look at. We do, but recovery today is built on the foundation for a majority of daily meeting attendance, group therapy, and checking in, not taking the first drink, and practicing ways to stay sober 1 day at a time and shielding ourselves from temptation. Basically, on human power, taking the affirmation that will not take the first drink. Meaning people place dependence on human power rather than God. Again, not everybody. And I love meetings, don't get me wrong. Deep spiritual change is obviously necessary the way the big book describes. And people believe meetings are the program, and it's not. The big book is rarely quoted today. Not like it was when I first got here. People believe our biggest problem is drinking and how to stay stopped. And a lot of people people have the belief that sobriety is this difficult, painful process that lasts a lifetime. There's no relief from the mental obsession, and I'm always recovering, and relapse is a part of recovery. And those who do this stuff are looked at as narrow-minded and step Nazis and religious points of view and a bunch of beautiful things. But the average person in recovery believes you can't be recovered. And it's far from that, especially when recovers in the big book 17 times and recover, which means the same thing pretty much, is in there 25 times, recovering's in there twice. But recovery has nothing to do with fighting addiction. It's not even about being sober. Recovery is deeper than that. It's not sitting around with resentments and fear in our head and fighting this. Recovery means to have something back, like a football game. They say fumble recovery, but we're going for something deeper than a football here. We're trying to receive a higher state of God consciousness so we can overcome the fatal malady of alcoholism and continue to grow spiritually. AE founder referred to recovery as freedom from alcohol. In other words, recovery is about transformation. Being abstinent will not free us from our emotional challenges. Will not free us from emotional challenges. Recovery is about changing our outlook, our thoughts, and our perceptions so we can be happily and usefully whole. What we need is long-term emotion. We need for long-term recovery is emotional sobriety. And some of you may have heard this term before. What is emotional sobriety? I've heard the meaning bounce around the fellowship as being happy, joyous, and free. And, some say it's the ability to cope with emotions or knowing your emotions, or feeling your feelings. Emotional sobriety runs way deeper than that. If you wish to stay sober over the long haul, we must become aware of our negative emotions. The essence of, that's the essence of awareness. What I am aware of in life, I can work on. I can let go of stuff once I'm aware of it. But what I'm not aware of in life will always control me. Emotional sobriety is the ability to become aware of our negative emotions, such as resentment, and knowing the driving forces behind it, those instincts, so I can let them go. And as then we become in sync with our higher power. Awakening begins. The question is, how do we do that? And the book tells us our emotions must be cast out. I'm going to read Bill Wilson, 1960. He's going to tell us right here. If we examine every disturbance we have, every disturbance, great or small. So he gives us two things. Every disturbance we examine, inventory, great or small. So pretty interesting. We will find that the root of its unhealthy dependence is its constant demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender those hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live in love. We will be able to gain emotional sobriety. We need a spiritual remedy. The 12 steps are that remedy. And if followed as directed, then you can continue this design living that works, and you live the rest of your life with it. Meaning if you do the program, not only will you achieve physical sobriety, like a lot of people have, we can also have emotional sobriety. And that brings us, the whole spiritual aspect. Big Book, page 27, defines spiritual transformation as follows. And it perfectly defines it, middle of 27. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. There it is. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding force of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. I wish we could do that on our own. And a completely new set of conceptions and modes begin to dominate us. So basically, the alcoholic's former self, former center, of his life, which was the obsession and living on self-will, is replaced by a deep sense of personal spirituality. In other words, dependence upon God through God consciousness. That type of radical change is absolutely necessary for long-term recovery. The formula is found in the big book. That's what this workshop is about when we go through these steps. Addiction takes us far away from who we're intended to be, far away. The 12 steps are not only remove the obsession, they help us return to the person God intends to be, which maybe the person we were as a child. You know, the way we look at the 12 steps here is simple. They remove steps that stands between us and God. And then we can be restored to sanity. And we don't do it. Remember what the big book says, you know, its main purpose is a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. A lot of people look at it as, I'm going to find a power greater than self so I can solve this. No, it's which will solve your power greater than yourself, so the power greater than yourself can solve your problem. Recovery is not, you know, about becoming a new person once. It's about becoming a new person daily, better than yesterday. Our journey is, so this is a never-ending journey. In this workshop, we will show you through actual experience how to do the steps so you can understand this emotional sobriety deeper. And recovery, I'm going to wrap it up with this. In recovery, we can take one or two roads. One is an easier road where the reward is easier, right? Or you can take the harder road of vigorous action that removes the obsession, empowering one to be recovered, and the reward is freedom. I know what I want. And next week we will do step 1 and bring a sponsee, bring a friend, let people know about it. It's going to be fun. Spread the word. I'm going to stop the recording.